Sony's new DualSense Edge controller that costs $200 actually has a moderately lower battery life than the standard DualSense controller. People are probably going to be upset about this. Many people might have expected that with the increased features and things that you can do, but there's also an interesting approach to stick drift. I did a little research into what it will cost you. The controller itself is $200, but if you experience stick drift, there's a unique approach and solution. If you haven't had this happen on a controller, it can be very frustrating. It happens on Nintendo controllers, Xbox controllers, and even PlayStation. It has to do with the actual stick manufacturers that everybody uses, and I'll touch on that in a moment, but I do want to open up by looking at The Verge and their article. Everyone's sort of citing their article here, TheVerge.com, talking about the battery life being moderately lower. And they did publish a video if you want to check it out. So I just published my hands-on impressions of Sony's new DualSense Edge gamepad, the $200 answer to Microsoft's Xbox Elite controllers, and I came away fairly impressed. But you should know that there's one not-so-impressive change from the original DualSense controller. It's got less battery life, Sony confirms to The Verge. So the company has a full statement about that. What's Sony say? The DualSense Edge wireless controller's operating time is moderately shorter than the original DualSense wireless controller because we've included many more features within the same form factor and ergonomic design as the original DualSense controller. Now, on the front half, I'm totally fine with this to a certain extent. I wouldn't want to buy a DualSense Edge controller and have it be bigger or bulkier or different in shape and size. I have really grown to like the DualSense controller more than the Xbox. There was a time where I did not like PlayStation 4 controllers. They didn't feel that great, and I really preferred Xbox. I actually like them both pretty equally now, with a little slight preference toward the DualSense because of the haptic feedback, and I just tend to play more PlayStation games right now because we're sort of waiting for some of the bigger Xbox releases. Now, this is what they also say here. We wanted to strike a good balance between wireless operating time and delivering robust high-performance features. Additionally, the longer USB braided cable is also great for competitive players who prefer playing with a wired connection to avoid wireless interference. This option preserves battery life. I think it's great that it comes with that long braided cable. That's always nice. I really like having those cables. I prefer to be plugged in. I actually prefer the controller to use the USB instead of wireless. I went into the settings and changed that. There was even a time where I was playing Returnal, was streaming, and I didn't see that I had the low battery notification, which would have been really bad in a game like that, because if your battery dies, I don't know if it automatically pauses it or not, but that could be a run-ending event in Returnal. So this is, I think, a bummer for some people. I will admit paying $200 for a controller and getting less battery life is probably going to be a sticking point for some people. I, for one, rarely run off battery life, and even when I do, I'm not doing it to the extent of, oh man, this has just ruined my night. This thing doesn't last long enough. I don't think it's going to be dying that fast, and it is understandable why. Battery life and battery technology in general tends to lag behind tech advancements, and that probably is keeping the price of the controller down. If they would have tried to get a similar size battery that lasted longer, it would have likely raised the price. They also said here, Sony set out in the late 2018 to build a high-performance premium controller, holding over 100 research sessions with pro gamers to figure out the biggest pain points, says DualSense Edge product manager Tamamasa Mizuno. He says the company eventually challenged itself to build an uncompromised gamepad in the same form factor as the excellent DualSense gamepad that shipped with the PS5. And I think they actually have done an excellent job with their controller. I think one of the selling points of the PS5 is the controller. It's very comfortable. I've got a couple of them. I have a black one, 2 white ones, and then I have the God of War one. And I love them. I think they're very comfortable. Thankfully, I haven't had any stick drift on them, but I do know it's possible. I know they're not immune to that reality. I will never pretend that Sony controllers don't get that. They do. People think I'm a bit of a Sony fanboy. I love their games and their platform, but I also love my Series X, and I still think an Xbox controller feels like home, but I just can't stand how many of my Xbox controllers are just sitting around with stick drift. Every generation of Sony wireless controller has had weak battery life, including the original DualSense. It apparently isn't one of the pain points that Sony is addressing this time. That is true. I have noticed that. You know, I tend to feel like I'm playing Dismantle, really fun game with my wife on our PlayStation 5 in the living room, and I feel like I'm having to charge the controllers almost every other night, and we only play for maybe 2 hours a session, so you're talking maybe 4 hours of battery life. At least that's what it feels like. In my experience, the author says, the DualSense lasts longer than my DualShock 3 and DualShock 4, but I still bought a dedicated charging stand because it still runs out of battery at inconvenient times. You can use such a stand with the DualSense Edge 2 or plug in the bundled 2.8 meter USB-C cable if it'll reach your couch. Some of us play commonly at a desk like I do, but in my living room, if we need to plug in, not that difficult. Another thing you can do is if you get the right USB plug-in and a plug is closer to you than your PlayStation, you can use those. A lot of the times they don't work. It'd be great if Sony sold something like that proprietary that would work all the time. Because sometimes you're sitting on the couch and there might be a plug right next to you in the wall, or, you know, you could run an extension cord or something instead of running a cable up to the television where your PlayStation sits. Sony also isn't directly addressing joystick drift, the phenomenon where the normal wear and tear on the potentiometer-based joysticks, I don't know how to say that, potentiometer? Anyway, potent meter, I'll say that. I'll just call it what I want. Let's call it crap. That's what it is. They don't work. They break. They wear down over time. There's new technology that has like a frictionless joystick that will never get stick drift. But I understand why these companies cannot disrupt production lines and suddenly start using those. It's going to take a long time before that technology gets sort of integrated into the controllers. I don't even know if we'll see that before the next generation of consoles. Hopefully we do. Hopefully that's a selling point of the next generation of consoles so we can leave this era behind of stick drift. Very, very frustrating. If you're unfamiliar with this, Sony has confirmed that the DualSense Edge uses the same joysticks, okay? So if you're unfamiliar with this, wear and tear on the joystick gives you stick drift. Most often it's the left joystick because that's the one you're holding forward the most, whether you're sprinting or pushing forward in a sports game or something. Commonly you're holding up on the left joystick, and that commonly leads to stick drift, which means it thinks that the stick is pushing forward and it's not. So you'll just be kind of walking forward when you intend to just stand still in a town or stop moving to check inventory or something. So that is a potential risk. And I'll say that's a huge turnoff. It's like, well, what? I'm going to spend $200 on your DualSense Edge controller, and I could end up with stick drift down the road. Now, we did a little bit of research, and the Verge article pinpoints this. You can buy these modules direct from Sony. They have like the Sony Direct. So on their site, you can buy these modules for $20, and you replace the whole joystick module. So this might not be the answer that people want to hear. They talk about it here. If your DualSense controller does start drifting, though, it's easier to fix than most. Sony made the controller's joysticks completely modular. You can swap them out in under a minute without tools, and you'll be able to buy those modules for $20 at PlayStation.com on January 26th or participating retailers in late February. So once February rolls around, you'll be able to snag these potentially on Amazon or whatever. And I know this seems like, and I know people will spin this and say, that's a cash grab. Okay, what I would rather do is spend $20 to conveniently fix my $200 controller instead of having 4 Elite controllers that are unusable. And no, I didn't do it within the warranty. I didn't feel like doing that. I don't feel like going through the chore of sending an email, shipping my controller off, waiting for it to come back, waiting for repairs. I heard nightmare stories about how long it took and all the hoops you had to jump through. I don't want to do all that. I am all about convenience. And at that point, yes, I'm going to be that consumer that says, look, take my $20 so my controller can be fixed, and who knows, sometimes you don't get stick drift for a very, very long time. I could replace that module for $20 and not experience stick drift for a year or more. I sometimes have controllers even now that have no stick drift. I don't know if I'm treating them better. Maybe I'm just not playing as many first-person shooters where you're constantly holding forward to run. That might be one of the culprits here. But even my Xbox controllers that I buy for $40 or $50, it'd be nice to just be able to spend $10 or $20 to just swap out the joystick and keep the controller. I would have willingly paid Microsoft $20 to fix my Elite controllers because then I'd only have 2, not before. I kept buying them because, number one, I was really big into it at that point. I wanted to showcase it. I was also in a different situation financially, so it was just like, hey, it's not that big of a deal to drop that kind of money on a controller and then business expense it and showcase it to the audience. But it did get pesky and annoying. And now, as someone who is more in the status of thinking like just like a normal consumer, I'm not just throwing money at every piece of technology that comes out. I have to think more frugally. It's like, well, I'd spend 20 to fix that instead of just having to replace the controller or just deal with stick drift, which is just infuriating. Sony declined to answer questions about whether it considered longer battery life or magnetic Hall effect sensor joysticks during the DualSense's development process. So they declined to answer that. If you're unaware, there's a magnetic style joystick that's basically frictionless that removes that wear and tear over time, which ultimately is what leads to stick drift. So at the end of the day, I pre-ordered this controller because I actually really believe in Sony's tech. I feel like I've gotten good results and good experiences with their DualSense controllers. So I really wanted that Edge controller, and I will provide my own feedback. Obviously, if it gets stick drift early on, I'll be disappointed. I'll air that criticism. I'll make people aware. But I'll be more than willing to drop $20 to fix it. At the end of the day, it's just about the economics of it. And I don't fault Nintendo or Microsoft or Sony right now. I don't fault them for not absolutely disrupting production lines to switch to a whole new joystick, because I think that's just going to take time to integrate into the funnel, to product test and make sure it fits into the form factor and make sure it works with their, their software and everything. They got to go through all that quality assurance and then start production spinning up. And I hope that we can again see that in the next generation of consoles. I want to know what you think about this. Is this unacceptable? The battery life, the stick drift risk, the ability to basically monetize fixing stick drift. Where do you land on these? Call me a Sony fanboy if you want. I'm curious what you think on these subjects. As well as I'd love to see you come and interact with me during live streams. So hit subscribe and the bell button. That way I can see you in the next video.